I call this meeting to order. It's 7:01. I just gonna say this is a joint meeting from the Woodstock Neighborhood Association and the Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Association. So Stephanie Frederick is our representative from the Brentwood-Darlington Neighborhood Association and was very important in preparing this meeting and helping along. And my name is Anna Weichsel. I'm the chair of the Woodstock Neighborhood Association, and the two of us, Stephanie and I, are going to facilitate this meeting and moderating our panel discussion. After we are done with our panel discussion, Woodstock Neighborhood Association has still a little board business, very brief. So nobody else needs to stay for it. We just have to vote on a few things that we need to straighten out. But with this, we're gonna dive into our panel discussion, and I want to just say to everybody who is joining us from the neighborhoods, if you have any questions that you already have in your mind or that pop up during the discussion, please write those in the chat and we will get to those after our panelists going to answer the questions. A general point about our meeting tonight is we are really striving for an informative session that addresses the content issues that are at stake with the proposal on a city charter commission. And we want to hear really good arguments about the pros and cons of the proposal restructuring the government. And I know there are some very strong opinions here, but I would really ask you to go to the points rather than putting your opinion forward. I mean, they will show obviously through your argument, but we really want to give informative background here. And with that, I like to introduce our panelists, and I'm very grateful you all agreed to come and you showed up tonight. I have to say, over the last 2 months, I probably wrote emails to 30 or over 30 people, and I get only feedback from like 10, and a few just had time conflicts, but it was a very, very cumbersome process to actually get people. So that's why I'm very grateful you agreed. Mm-hmm. So with that, I want to introduce Amir Streeter. And I would ask you to very briefly say like 2 or 3 sentences about yourself, what your background is.
Sure. Thank you so much, Anna. It's really good to be here. So my name is Amir Streeter, and I am a Charter Review Commissioner, just so folks know, but I'm here today in my personal capacity to tell you more about the measure. I'm actually very excited to talk to you about it and have an informative discussion today. As a trained and educated lawyer who spent basically my entire career in government, everything from working in the state legislature to working at the city as a staffer for Commissioner Nick Fish, I really have firsthand knowledge of how government systems work or don't work well. And I believe the measure fosters accountability, transparency, and equitable representation. So very excited to talk about that today.
Okay, thank you. Our next panelist is Debbie Kitchen. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Debbie Kitchen, and my husband and I own Interworks General Contractors. We've been in business almost 30 years in Portland. And prior to that, I was a regional economist for 20 years. So kind of a dual career person, and have been an advocate for small businesses, and just excited because I lived in the Brentwood-Darlington neighborhood when I first moved to Portland a long time ago, and very familiar with it.
So welcome back, at least virtually.
Yeah.
Okay, our next panelist is Stephen Kafuri.
Hi, my name is Stephen Kafuri. I served in the legislature from close in southeast and northeast Portland, 4 years in the House of Representatives, 4 years in the state Senate, and served on the Portland School Board for 12 years. And I'm very excited for this opportunity tonight, and thank you for putting us on.
Great. Our next panelist is Terry Harris.
Hey, and also thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Terry Harris. I'm an attorney licensed in Maryland, and have been following the Charter Commission's efforts here for the duration, largely because in Baltimore we had some of these issues and addressed them pretty squarely. And I served on a task force that looked a lot like this Charter Commission there. And I'm happy to discuss where they're the similar and where they're different.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
And the next one of our panelists is Ethan Seltzer.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for the invitation. Glad to be here tonight. I am an emeritus professor at Portland State University, but before going to Portland State, I worked for Southeast Uplift Neighborhood Program. I worked for Commissioner Mike Lindbergh. I worked at the regional level, and I worked statewide. So I've kind of had a view of government at all the different scales that we've got here in Oregon. And this is a really important issue, and I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great. So we have a lot of good background knowledge that you all bring to the table here, or to the virtual room rather. So I'm very excited to hear from each of you. The format for our panel discussion will be that Stephanie and we will bring up a few questions which we had sent out to the panelists before, so they are well prepared. It's not like a big surprise to them. And we will ask directly one of the panelists to start off with an answer, and then the others can chime in with agreement, disagreement, other aspects, and to say, like, to bring up the full picture, what's at stake in these individual.
Should they raise their hands and be called on?
Yes, and once we go, when the first person has answered, it would be great if you could raise your hand, and then we can call on you and say, like, please respond, so that we have like a well-organized discussion. So to start the forum, and maybe one word, if you are not speaking, maybe it's good to have yourself muted, so we don't have background noises and interferences. So just to get to know what's going to be on our ballot, and Stephanie and we had some smiles about this before. I'm going to read what will be the actual text on the ballot. And it says, amends charter, changes Portland's government structure and process for electing city officials. Should administrators manage city government, 12-member council, 3 from each district, make laws, voters elect officials using ranked choice process, ? So it's a very interestingly worded brief measure. So, but this is what is at stake right now. And with that, we just want to start with our first question, which addresses the question of the mayor and the mayor's role in the new structure. The mayor's office will prepare the annual budget. The mayor will oversee the city manager, the police chief, and the city attorney. The mayor is responsible for carrying out laws approved by the 12-member city council. The mayor may introduce laws for council consideration. The mayor may break tie votes on non-emergency matters, but not on emergency rulings. So with that question is, so Mayor Wheeler already has objected. Mayor Wheeler has objected to implementing laws without having any say in those laws. He does not wish to be forced to implement bad law. So that's something that we already have out here. So now my question is this a valid concern how do other city governments deal with this particular issue? And I want to put that out to Amira first.
Thanks, Anna, for the question. I think it's a really interesting one that the commission had worked through for some time during our discussions. And let me just back up a little bit and say, during my time working in City Hall, with like our current mayor system and some of our current commissioners, I've been able to kind of see how things often get sideways from the way the current system is set up without a specific designation of powers between the mayor and council members. And oftentimes it gets a little confusing for constituents around who they're supposed to go to for what issue. And, the mayor is in charge of the police bureau, but it doesn't really necessarily seem to have a lot of power to control how they operate. And then the mayor can kind of switch bureaus at any time. And so the commission really looked to shift this confusing structure away from not only being unclear as to who is doing what, but making it super clear and balanced between different powers of who's going to be in leadership. So this measure has a balance of power between the council, the mayor, and the new city administrator that would be present. This is something that we heard loud and clear from Portlanders in all our listening sessions and community engagement processes that went forward. The discussions we had around the mayor's ability to, let's say, act as a tiebreaker or introduce veto power was something we discussed at length. And we decided to sort of create a balanced approach where the mayor can actually introduce policy. While they may not be able to vote, they get to work with city councilors to advance those priorities, whatever those are. We really want to make sure that we didn't have a situation where the mayor could ultimately have complete power over not only the policymaking process, but what was ultimately decided by people who were meant to represent us as Portlanders. So for example, I think the city of Oakland, the mayor doesn't have veto power, but the mayor can introduce policy that is sort of vetted through council and actually administered. Right now we have a system where it doesn't matter where the policy starts off with, but all the councilors have to agree and the mayor has to agree to it. This way, the mayor is acting as an executive over the system and still being able to be a part of the process in policymaking. So I don't think that this is necessarily a valid concern. The mayor can, break ties in non-emergency matters, but still has emergency powers to move things forward, say if it was another pandemic or natural disaster or something else that needs mayor power to move an emergency situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can I just, because we need to get to our other panelists to respond to this. Do we have one more point to say that's very urgent?
I want to look to Debbie and see if there's anything that she wanted to add.
Yes, I would add that this was an issue that we discussed quite a bit, and there were differences of opinions, but what we heard a lot from community was a concern about concentrating too much power in the mayor, and the mayor is getting a lot of authority in terms of having the executive function and overseeing the city manager who manages all the bureaus. So there is quite a bit of power there. And the other thing just to note is that, we looked at the 100 most populous U.S. cities in the U.S. and 41% do not have a mayoral veto. So it's not that it's a rare thing for no mayoral veto. I think each community has to decide what they're going to do in that regard. And the largest city is Houston. They're the fourth largest city in the US with a population of 2.3 million, and they don't have the mayoral veto.
Yeah. Okay, so I see, Ethan, you have your hand up for a while. What are your...
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I mean, I've got two concerns about the way the mayor's role is described in the proposal. One is that, you know, the mayor is the only elected official, other than the auditor, elected with a citywide point of view. And what that means is that there is no elected official with a citywide point of view participating in the legislative affairs of the city and the policymaking of the city. I think the question of a mayoral veto is actually kind of a red herring, meaning that, you know, it's not so much a question of the mayor having a veto. The mayor today does not have a veto. It's really a question of, is the mayor part of the legislative process? And the way the proposal is written, the mayor is explicitly written out of the legislative process by and large. The other thing about the mayor's role that is I think kind of problematic in the way the proposal is written is that this measure, which incidentally is 185 pages long, has within it the duties of the mayor, which includes that the mayor is authorized to authorize, negotiate, and execute all contracts, and that the mayor is also supposed to exercise a careful supervision over the general affairs of the city. Now, both of those things are also duties usually associated with the city manager. And so what this does by putting the mayor into this kind of administrative role is it really, I think, muddies the water with respect to the mayor's role, the city manager's role, and the council's role. So I'm not too concerned with Mayor Wheeler's concern that, you know, it would be policy without the mayor having a say, as much as I am with the fact that the mayor is just really not part of these processes, but in some ways is kind of too much a part of the very administrative process that we're trying to clarify through this charter amendment.
Okay.
Could I just have a quick rebuttal
Yes.
to that? Just one sentence. So the proposal still allows the mayor to advocate for policies and bring them to council to be legislated. Just to clarify that one point.
Yeah, that is correct. But then that kind of makes the mayor into an elected lobbyist.
That's an interesting point. Terry, or...
No, we'll wait to the next question.
Okay, because that's very related to it and maybe clarifies some of the issues between the mayor and the city manager question.
Okay, very fine. All right, we'll go on to a city manager question, and we'll ask Stephen Kafuri to speak first. First, let me read a little background. Candidates for city manager will be proposed by the mayor and approved or not by the 12-member city council. So I presume the mayor's office will be conducting these searches for candidates. The mayor can fire the city manager, so can the council by a 3/4 vote. Once approved, a city manager will report to the mayor. The manager would implement the laws approved by city council and manage the city's bureaus. The manager would hire, fire, and supervise bureau directors, except for the police chief and the city attorney, both of whom would be hired by the mayor after approval by the city council. So here's the question. The city manager will have a powerful position. Do you foresee a transitional time of conflict between city manager and strong bureau directors, or will the relative constancy of a city management office come as a relief to our bureau management? Stephen.
The interesting part of this question, the answer is that both sides see a role for a city manager. That is not in dispute at all. Everyone agrees that the system we have now, where the council has both legislative and administrative functions, is broken. And everybody strongly wants to separate the administrative and legislative functions. if I can just answer your question directly first, and very quickly, we're concerned that the city manager, his role or her role is not as clear cut as it might be. There's a chart that the commission put out showing the city manager being responsible not only to the mayor, but back to the city council. And we're concerned that this leaves the city manager in a role where he or she has to be looking over their shoulder all the time when they're making administrative decisions to see who are they pleasing. And we think that's not functional. Now, one thing I did want to say here is that we, the opponents, spent a lot of time talking to a large number of former city council staff members. Their names are now on our website, and the roles that they held are on our website, and the dates that they served. When we asked these people, would they support the status quo, none of them support the status quo. So I get a feeling that it can be a smooth transition. However, when we asked them, do you support the Charter Commission's report? Again, none of them supported the Charter Commission's report. And these are folks who are retired now. They have no stake in the game. They have no personal gain or loss. It's just that they have had this experience, and their experience has shown that the Charter Commission report does not meet their standards, but the standards of the Mingus Maps' plan is what they're looking for, and we'll be talking about that later.
Okay, thank you. Is there another person? Oh, Debbie Kitchen, go right ahead, Debbie.
Yes, I just also wanted to add that one of the things the Charter Commission did do was meet with all the bureau directors in groups. And so the aspect of your question of whether there would be resistance from bureau directors, that wasn't the perception that we got. Their current system that they're working under with a city commissioner overseeing them, and then it gets changed every, sometimes 18 months or 2 years. That's not required, but it just happens to get changed because the bureaus get reshuffled sometimes. And that has been really difficult for them. So they were all supportive of moving to some type of city manager. And then as Stephen pointed out, that's not really a point of disagreement between most people on the no side and most people on the yes side. Most people are, I think, of the discussions I've heard, there's generally support for a city manager position or city administrator, whatever you call it.
So I'd like to ask a personal question. I am not very technological, and I just see a chat up here. It says, but someone's asking me, could I put on my website for the Partners for Common Sense Government? I looked on my iPad.
I will provide that, Stephen. Let's stay with the topic. I will provide that later.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Ethan.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting here is that we all agree that the way the city is administered needs to change. And unfortunately, the way the proposal is written, we don't get to just vote on that issue. We have to vote on it lumped in with a whole lot of other stuff. Mm-hmm. If we had a separate measure on the ballot to shift to a city manager form of government, I think there'd be a lot of support for that, because we want to see the service delivery in the city of Portland become more effective and more efficient. Everybody does. The real concern here is on the governing side. And because the governance and the administration components of this measure are all pushed together, we as citizens don't get a chance to basically deal with those individually, I think, the way we would like.
Mm-hmm.
And could I have a quick response to
Yes.
just that piece? So in terms of the amount of support we got from the different parts of the proposal being broken out versus being put together. So we had actually polling that showed that support is not only like we have support for the different aspects of the proposal, but when you group them all together, support for the overall measure grows exponentially. And you really can't have one part of the proposal work with the other. Our proposals show that the majority of Portlanders would like to see the proposal put together. So just want to clarify that.
There was a recent poll that was taken that was not shown to the commission that showed that 72% of the people in the city of Portland wanted to have the measure separated. And that was withheld from them.
There was actually a, I see Debbie, you came off mute. There a recent report about that, that folks might have seen on the news with our fellow commissioner, Melanie Billings-Yun, who was talking about like the way the questions were asked were actually not like a summation of how people actually felt about the measure itself.
I just want to point out, I don't want to go into this kind of how are people voting and what are the polls right now. I think the question is really to understand what is the city manager's task here and what is the criticism that could be potentially jeopardize a smooth working of city council, and where is that support between the mayor and the city manager? How is that organized? I think that's more something that we need to understand as non-politicians and non-council managers.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think we were responding though to Ethan's point about bundling the measures. And, you know, I think there was a sensitivity about how if you are strengthening and your representation on the council, you want to, that balance between the mayor and the council is very important. But in terms of, you know, the city manager, I think there isn't a lot of disagreement between the yes side and the no side about the need for a city manager, and that would be an improvement over our current existing system.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. Oh, go ahead,
Ethan,
Ethan.
yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with Debbie. And I guess the one thing I would add is that there is no perfect form of administration or city structure or governance. I mean, these things are all, these are all works of art. And if it was the case that there was one system that was just perfect, everybody would use it, but it doesn't exist. City managers, I think, bring a lot of clarity to how administration happens. But make no mistake that one of the things that happens with the city manager is that there's a lot of decisions made every single day, day by day, minute by minute, within the bureaucracy of the city, which will now get made solely in the administrative kind of precincts of the city itself. So, you know, we give up a little bit of transparency to get the efficiency that we're seeking. But I think at this point, both sides of this debate kind of agree that, well, let's try that, because it's time to try something a little different on the administrative side than we've had for the last 100 years.
If I can just sum up this conversation real quickly in maybe 2 sentences. Both sides agree there's a need for city manager. Our side says the devil is in the details, and we don't like the details. We think the details make it complicated and unclear. And all the people who have ever served in the city council, the staff that we could contact, and former mayors and former city commissioners unanimously agree with that position.
Amira, I saw you had your hand up earlier.
Oh yeah, I was just going to explain a little bit about like the balance of and clear separation of powers that we were talking about earlier. So hopefully this will make people feel that each system is accountable to each other and not just passed off. And I can totally understand the concern about our government being not transparent and where decisions end up. But the mayor would nominate the city administrator. The city council would confirm that administrator to work, and then the administrator is sort of reporting back to the mayor while overseeing the bureau directors. So there is this system of accountability that is trying to be brought into the proposal structure. And I just wanted to mention that to folks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Amira. Then, if there are no other comments, we can go on to our next question. Go ahead.
Yeah. I will.
Okay.
So then our next question addresses the responsibilities of City Council. As now the City Council would continue to exercise legislative power to make laws and approve the city's budget. With the current government structure, residents can ask commissioners to direct their assigned bureaus to take specific actions. For example, install bike lanes, improve intersections, pick up trash, change speed limits, etc. Now to our question, and we are addressing that to Debbie. Under the new structure, will commissioners be able to connect with bureaus directly to ask for, say, particular cases of fallen tree removal or such things? Or will they be directing upset residents to the city manager's office or to the bureau staff directly? Will commissioners be advocating for more general XYZ to the city manager or to the mayor? You know, just to get this kind of understanding for us, how is that structure, response, resident, city council, working bureaus kind of relationship there to make it a little more straight.
Right. And this kind of addresses what Stephen had brought up earlier about the little graph, the chart that was in some of it's not in the charter amendments, it's in some of the public information describing things. So first of all, it's important to say that the charter is like the Constitution for the city. So it has the basic framework and some rules and lines of authority and things that are in it, but there are still going to be sort of operating things that are not in the charter that the city commission will adopt, operating rules, you know, when they meet, things like that. We don't want to put things like that in the charter that have to go to a public vote because it doesn't allow the government to be flexible or adaptable or just change the way they do business. So some things are not outlined in a great amount of detail in terms of the operations. But the things we discussed in looking at these forms and hearing about other cities that had these forms is that often the city manager does go to the council meetings, reports about bureau activities, responds to questions from commissioners, the city council, and they will be there talking about the operations of the city and describing initiatives that are happening, how legislation is being carried out. So they have a reporting function to the city council, but they are directed on a day-to-day basis under the mayor. But there still will be dialogue and questions. And then the city council, because they are the legislative function, will pass the laws or ordinances about, you know, changes in programs and things. They adopt the budget. So all of that, there is a lot of interaction, you know, because the bureaus will be, the mayor proposes the budget, but that comes up usually from the bureaus and, you know, then is put together in a city budget that the mayor proposes to the city council. Then they go through their process of vetting it, asking for public comment and everything. So, you know, some of those specific rules are not in the charter because those are operating rules that are going to be adopted, you know, by the council. And some of them will be put in place by the council that is in place now, you know, over the next couple of years, getting ready for things. And then the new council will be able to adapt things as they want over time without having to go back for a charter vote. But that's what we anticipate will be the role and relationship in those meetings. We also anticipate that with a larger council, there would probably be some committees organized around different topic areas based on commissioner interest and, you know, sort of spreading the load. So this is something that happens in legislative functions, say in the state legislature, to go more in depth by some council members and bring it back to the full council for votes. So those are just some operating things. They're not, all those details are not in the charter just because it is more like a constitution and needs to stay at a high level.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, in that regard, because what I'm also hearing as concerns is how much direct democratic participation is still there, and that I think not only aligns with this proposal for the changed government structure, that also has a lot to do with Portland growing, having more people, where this kind of very direct participation, go to your bureau, go to your commissioner, might not work anymore. And I'm just wondering how this kind of, you know, is worked into that proposal right now. I
do anticipate that people will still go to, you know, they'll be often a citizen. If you are trying to get something done or you need to get a permit, you go directly to the bureau. You would, you know, and then if you have problems, you would go to your district representatives to intervene on these things.
Yeah. So I see Terry has his hand up.
I think, and I know we have a question later about this, about the multi-member districts, but you can see where this could be problematic, and it was problematic in Baltimore, where you had 3 representatives in a district and you didn't know which representative to go to get something done, or the district representatives disagreed about the approach and bickered with each other and nothing got done, or there was a deal making between the district's council members that either went directly to a bureau or kept it from going from a bureau. And there was no way to hold people accountable. So I know we're going to talk about this later, but this is exactly the problem with multi-member districts. And I don't know how that gets solved.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I could.
Amira had her hand up first, and then we go to you, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. If Stephen had a comment directly to what Terry just said, I think he can go before me if he wants.
It's not directly what Terry had to say. It's what I wanted to say was that I see a problem with having 12 members. I think it's just too many. And if you have too many members and they don't have any administrative functions, I see a lot of opportunity for mischief and for people getting involved in micromanaging and going to the bureaus. When I served in the legislature and in the school board, both, it was very clear what the role of the legislative people were, and they were not to get involved in administration. And for example, in the school board, if somebody had a problem with their school, we went right directly to the superintendent and said, "Mr. Superintendent, you should take care of this issue." And then what I would envision in the city, the same thing if somebody goes to a city commissioner and says, "I got a problem with my area here, you know, the tree has fallen down, as you said earlier, need somebody to come pick it up," that the city manager would be the one, and for the people who are on the city council to go see and not try to take care of things themselves. The more people that you have and a certain amount of work that's the same, the more you divide that work up, the less each person has to do. And when people have a lot of time and not much to do, they get into mischief.
Okay, Amira?
Yeah, so I just want to say that, you know, adding more representation adds more representation and accountability. So every elected official that would be around for, if the proposal moves forward, the measure moves forward, is that they would be accountable for that district that they represent. And in my mind, having more voices at the table, more representation, more people present really opens up that dialogue and connection with constituents. Just from my time in City Hall, I've seen directly how, you know, commissioners would get caught in the situation where they would have to be accountable for their bureau and not necessarily a Portlander or organization. So you'd have this weird system where, you know, let's say someone has a problem with the tree code, and then it would bubble up to the bureau and then go to the commissioner, and the commissioner would ask the bureau heads and staff, like, what's going on with this? They would explain, and then the commissioner would be like, oh, okay, well, there's not much I can do about that unless I change policy. And it sounds like this is just one person's issue. I feel if you have 3 people in 4 districts, 12 total members, you're going to have more ears hearing the concerns of the constituents. And I know we'll talk more about multi-member a little bit later, but the system that was set up in Baltimore is not what Portland was built on. And the proposal was built for our history and who we are as Portland.
Okay, Debbie?
Can I just add one thing? My lights went on in my room here all of a sudden, so if I look dark, it's not, I haven't gone
That's
anywhere.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, and I also, one of the things that we heard in we had, 26 listening sessions and multiple hearings and talked to lots of people in the community, did over 130 presentations in the community. And one of the things we heard a lot about was that constituents didn't feel like they could talk to their city commissioners. And the city commissioners, we have to give them credit. They are managing bureaus. It's and trying to act as legislators and trying to, meet with their constituents. And it is too much for a city the size of Portland and how we've grown to have 4 city commissioners and a mayor doing all of that. It's just way too much. And people didn't feel like they had any access at all. They weren't able to meet with commissioners. Their schedules are terribly overbooked. So I think that having more representation is very important in order to have the commissioners actually be in community, listening to the concerns and finding out how programs are working, how the bureaus are working in our community. The commissioners don't have time for that now. And the expectation with this model is that there would be a lot more time for them to be in community and understanding what the issues are for people in Portland.
Mm-hmm. And then bringing that to the bureaus. So that's kind of okay. So very briefly, Ethan, you are muted.
Thank you, Anna. So very briefly, with any transition to a new system, there's going to be a learning curve. And there's going to be a lot of things to learn with whatever direction the charter takes. I think one of the things we should be a little concerned about, though, is how little is spelled out in the charter, how little we know about how this is going to work and how little has actually been talked about with respect to the actual administration of the city. And I think from the standpoint of the neighborhood point of view, one thing I think about as a neighborhood person is, okay, now I've got 3 people within my district that I have to go to. Because if I want to get the attention of the city manager is going to ask me, I'm sure, have you talked to all the representatives from your district? And so I think this is going to end up leading us into kind of a whole new realm of requirement for action on the part of neighborhood volunteers. And I just think we just need to think that through. I don't think it has been thought through.
I'd just like to make it clear, if I can sum up again, everyone agrees that there should be single member districts representing geographical areas. Right now, everyone's elected at large, and both sides, the proponents and the opponents, both suggest that there be districts, geographically based districts. That's not a point of contention. The point of contention is how many of them are there, and if there are multi-member districts or not.
And if I could just respond to that general sentiment really quickly. So I think everyone can agree that the goal of democracy in and of itself is to bring people together for consensus. And so if you were to have, and I know we're going to get to this issue later on, but just one member per district, you're not going to get the breadth of experience and background that you might get with 3 members to one district. So let's say you just have one person who's, let's say, like a renter and they live in Southeast. And by having 3 members to a district, you could have a renter, you could have a homeowner, you could have someone who is passionate about the environment, for example. And all these people are getting together and talking these things through to figure out what policy they're going to move forward together and what things they might want to take up on their own. And I think, you know, the Charter Review Commission in and of itself is a really good example of how democracy can work. We had 20 people of a huge variety of different backgrounds all coming together to move one proposal forward. And if we could do that with very little discourse or disagreement among us, surely 3 people who are representing a district of Portlanders can do the same.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we're gonna come back to the multi-rep districts in a little while, but first, Stephanie has another question.
Okay, yes, let's take a break from multi-rep districts for a moment and look at one aspect of ranked choice voting. I will ask you to respond, Ethan Seltzer. And let me just give a little background here. The focus of recent discussion has been on the mystery of ranked choice voting and how it works. Proponents believe that it disadvantages extremist candidates, advantages female and minority candidates, and better represents the preferences of the electorate. So aside from how it exactly works, let's focus on the following. Do you agree with proponents' assessments of ranked choice voting? That is, does it disadvantage extremist candidates, advantage female and minority candidates, and better represent the preferences of the electorate? So Ethan, please respond first.
I'd like to have Terry, if I might, respond first for our side.
Okay. Go ahead, Terry.
Let me try and talk about that a little bit. And because there are 2 different versions of ranked choice voting that are in this proposal. And the one that is more commonly used and the one that is used elsewhere in the United States and in a few districts, municipalities in Alaska, is sort of an instant runoff. So you're electing one person to one seat and it gets rid of the primary election and you can rank your choices and that's how you do the election. Again, that's the common one. That's one that, you know, I don't care that much about. It's election as a measuring device of what the people want in their voting. And it's one tool, one way of doing it. There are pros and cons to that. Where the problem is for me, and it goes back to the multi-member districts, but what's being proposed for the districts is a different kind of ranked choice voting. You rank the candidates, but you get one ballot and you're electing 3 positions. So you get a first choice and you can rank the others, but you have one ballot. You're gonna get no more votes than electing one person. And so that's what creates the proportionality, but it also lowers the threshold for being elected. So if you get 25% of the vote in a district plus 1, then you have enough votes to be elected as a city councilman under this proposal. My view is that's a really low threshold, that you will find extremist candidates or fringe candidates who by luck or by chance or random name recognition are going to get elected to the city council that wouldn't get elected with a 50% margin. And it doesn't solve the problems that I mentioned in the last question. When those 3 candidates get elected from different constituencies, because it's different ballots, right? How they work together for the 4 years in between elections is going to be problematic. So those are the concerns I have with ranked choice voting. It's not so much the voting, it's not so much the counting of the votes. All of that is, you know, just math. It's just computer programming, but it's the system that it's employing for proportional representation, and the fact that you're going to have three winners, but one ballot. You'll never get a shot at an individual accountability vote at all under that proposal. You don't, like you get now between Councilwoman Hardesty and an opponent, or Dan Ryan and an opponent. You get an up and down vote. If you like Dan Ryan, you vote for him. You don't like Dan Ryan, you vote against him. And that's nice and clean, and the accountability is direct, and it's simple and easy to understand, and it requires a majority. That's what we're used to, and it's not something that's broken, I don't think. But that's a matter of opinion, and I'm sure Debbie will have something to say about that right now.
And I see Debbie up there.
Debbie,
Okay.
would you like to chime in?
Yes, thank you. So I do think that in the, you know, that there is a important connection here between the ranked choice voting and the multi-member districts that's critical for better representation. And it does happen in a number of governments around the world. It's something that's in a few cities in the United States, but mostly it's in other countries. But it has a long history. And what it's shown is that ranked choice voting has the potential to result in more positive campaigns. So candidates are prone to collaborate because when you're running for office, you want to be not just their first choice, but if you're not their first choice, you want to be their second choice. So it has shown that campaigns are less prone to negative campaigning. There's empirical studies show that more women are elected in multi-member districts with ranked choice voting, and more people of color are elected in the multi-member approach. And the other thing I would say is I don't think there is a concern about fringe candidates. If you do the math, when you have 4 districts, in order to get 25% of the votes, and just taking the number of votes that were in the mayoral election in 2020, so that was 360,000. In order to get the 25% in these multi-member districts with 4 districts, you need to win 22,500 votes, roughly. If you had, you know, what Commissioner Mapps has proposed, 7 individual districts, because there's 7 of them, and to get to 50%, that's about 26,000. So the difference between 22.5 and 26 is not, you're not going to get, you know, they're pretty close, and you're not going to get fringe candidates if they have to win 22,500 votes. So it's just, I think that fear or concern is not valid. And I think what you can get is better representation of the range of opinions that you have in a district. If you have only one single person district, half of the people get their views represented and half don't. In the multi-member district, you would have, 75% basically of the voters would get at least one of the candidates that they supported or were in their second or third choices. So it's a much broader representation.
Interesting.
A quick response to that. I mean, the way this will work, though, is that, again, your ballot, you get 1 vote. You have a 75% chance that you will elect a candidate of your choice, but you have 100% chance that you're going to get 2 candidates elected who were not your first choice. Now, when you try and remove them from office, you try and get an accountability vote to remove one of those incumbents in the next cycle is a bad performer, you're going to need 75% of the vote to agree to get rid of that person. This is just sort of math. Getting rid of an incumbent becomes so much harder if the threshold for election is so much easier. And you know, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has one of these single transferable vote scenarios, their incumbents are reelected 90% of the time, going back to 1995. So it's really tough to single a candidate out who's a bad performer, who you don't like, who's fringe, and then get rid of them.
Okay, very interesting. That Debbie, did you want to?
Amira. I
Oh,
think,
I'm sorry.
muted herself.
Oh, did Amir, yeah, if you want to, well, I was just gonna, is my mute, okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. I was just gonna say that, you know, it is still always a high rate of incumbency winning re-election. I think the statistics I've heard is it's around 90% for incumbents in Oregon anyway. So I don't think that it's significantly different.
Okay,
Amira?
interesting. Amira.
And I also see Stephen's hand, but I just want to make a quick comment about the math. I think we're kind of getting a little bit confused about that, because right now with the system we have, you know, you could have folks win outright without having a majority of representing Portland, if that makes sense. So you could have, let's say, 2 people on the ballot and one person wins by 54%, but only like 20% of all eligible voters showed up to vote. So where does, I'm not seeing like the 75% that Terry just mentioned.
Well, I mean, if you're going to conflate turnout with the percent that it takes to win, then that's a whole different set of numbers. The reason you have, I saw something in the chat about the plurality. You know, you can elect somebody in a plurality in our current system only because you allow write-in votes in the general election after a primary. I mean, I don't know why you do that. If you're going to have a top 2 runoff, then you run off the top 2 and one of them is going to have a majority.
Right, but then it's
but
like
that's a fix that's a lot easier than this one.
well, it's kind of like you're choosing between, I don't want to say like 2 evils, but 2 bad choices, right? So with RCV, you're having better choices available to you. I think there was an election maybe a few years ago where there were like 15, 16 people running for mayor. And, you know, you can't just pick 3 mayors. We're not talking about that. But I just imagine how powerful it would have been to have that number of people run for a council seat instead, and you get the top 3 that folks can live with versus like a take it or leave it situation.
Yeah, that makes
Okay,
sense.
yes, thank you.
We have to wrap this up a little bit, but maybe, I mean, I think we're gonna keep the next question a little shorter, Debbie.
Well, I also wanted to add that one of the things that we see as an advantage to what's on the ballot is that it does lower barriers for first-time candidates because of the smaller district compared to at-large. And I think it would, so that kind of goes against the incumbency tendency. And they will, you know, I think incumbency is just something that is in all elections that we have. I mean, we're always going to have that. I don't think the proposed system is worse in that area, because I think it also makes it easier for first-time candidates to win in this structure with proportional representation. So I think it's just something that we are leaving it up to voters. So that's, you know, voters can always vote somebody out.
Okay, Stephen,
No,
I
they
saw your
can't.
finger.
Yeah, I
Okay.
just want to say something very quickly, and that is I don't know if you saw this week's Willamette Week, but a couple of reporters sat down with some experts and they tried to figure out how this system works. And that was just with proportional representation, not with a multi-member district, which has never been done anywhere, that combination of those two things. And they spent hours trying to figure it out. And at the end of it, they said, well, it's just like driving a car. You have to figure that you don't need to know how the engine works in order to drive a car. But, I think the voters want to understand what their vote means and how it works. And my father told me when I was a young man, don't ever invest money in something you don't understand. And I've never bought a Bitcoin, for example, because I don't understand how it works. And I think what the commission here is asking people to vote for a system that nobody understands. I mean that literally. The other day at Mingus Mapps' hearing, press conference, he was asked a question, do you understand this? And he said, no, I'm a political science PhD. I don't understand it. And David Knowles, who is a lawyer, a longtime public servant, and knows government law very well, said, I don't understand it. And Dan Ryan stepped in and said, I don't understand it either. So what you're asking for people to vote is a pig in a poke. And that's why we're opposing that measure.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
Debbie,
I
a
would-
very quick rebuttal.
Okay, yeah, just really quick. I mean, if you read the Willamette Week, I would encourage you to read the Willamette Week article because they did do an experiment and it was multi-member ranked choice voting. And at the end, they said, well, it actually works. And so they didn't say it doesn't work and we don't understand it. They were able to figure it out. And
After several hours.
But they said not everybody will want to, actually go through the exercise themselves, but they were able to prove to themselves that it works. And it is done in multiple cities in Ireland, in Scotland, in Australia, in various levels of government. So this is not something that's unprecedented.
No, don't go into larger discussion here. So thank you. So my European brain wants to chime in there on so many levels right now, but I'm not going to do this. So by the way, I'm not allowed to vote in this country. So I'm just like observing here what's going on. But let's bring our discussion back to our next question. Which is again the multi-rep districts. And so what we are trying to understand again, the relationship between residents and elected. The Charter Commission website states that having several reps will allow residents to access multiple pathways to share feedback. So our question with that is, what does sharing feedback actually means in that sentence? And will residents need to call all three reps in order to suggest that council enact new policies or tweak existing policies? I'm sorry. And then what is also associated with that question is a question about the relationships between the electeds. How will elected representatives work together? How is that orchestrated? Will they be likely to share the same constituencies? Do we expect them to work together in harmony or behave in independent individuals or some of both? How are discrepancies in understandings or wishes or will play out? And I would like to start with Terry on this one.
Yeah, thanks for letting me start this one off. This is the reason I'm involved at all in any of this. And
I figured.
So, I come from Baltimore. I was an attorney in Baltimore doing environmental work, environmental justice work, and was asked to serve on a task force that took a look at Baltimore's multi-member districts, and this is in 2001, 2002. What was going on in Baltimore is they had 6 3-member districts and people hated them, okay? They just couldn't stand them any longer. And the problem was they were dysfunctional for a variety of different reasons. primarily, and I know we'll get into this in the rebuttal, but it's not related to elections. This is after they're elected. They have to serve together for 4 years. And you're going to have people who are lazy, people who are not that smart, people who are very smart, but don't like to do constituent work, or people that like to do constituent work, but would rather not have to deal with legislation. And so you have different varieties, different flavors of council people, of different competencies and different levels of interest. And some of them were just extremely bad. You had deadwood galore on the Baltimore City Council. It was moribund, it was ineffective, it failed in big picture legislation and small picture constituent service. It was terrible, people hated them. So,
Okay.
so we studied it, and the Citizens Initiative went to smaller single member districts, and that passed by a 2-to-1 margin, and Baltimore never looked back. The representation got better, it got younger, it got more effective. They did more legislation, and the difference was you had a single person to call and a single person you could hold responsible and accountable in a vote. That was incredibly important. And so what happened in the campaign season is, rather than slates running together with backroom deals and joint fundraising and all of that sort of thing that you'd expect, you had people having to run by themselves in their districts, door to door. And the idea was, and now you cannot get elected in Baltimore unless you knock on every voter's door.
Okay.
A friend of mine is in the city council and knocked on every voter's door 4 times. So it's a whole different dynamic, and it works so much better for neighborhoods and so much better for neighborhood associations.
Yeah. So there is a lot of question in the chat, also to previous things, what the ratio of representation for each of those new districts was, what the ratio of residents to elected are. So
let me address. I'll address that. Baltimore is almost exactly the same size as Portland, and so it is now has 14 single member districts. So the ratios are much smaller. There was an interesting mention in the chat that, you know, Portland would get down to the 50,000 voters per council member. But you have to keep in mind that the Portland proposal is 4 districts. So it's really 150,000 voters per council member, because council members have to represent the whole district. They don't represent a third of it. You can't divide the work amongst council members. All of the council members have to report to all of the voters in the district. So the ratio of voter to council member is not really the same as council member to voter. And that's sort of, that mismatch seems to be ill understood.
Okay, Terry, I just, I apologize, Amira, because originally we said we're going to pose that question to you, but since Terry had such a strong voice on that question and the previous one, I wanted to give him the lead into that. But I want to give it to you now to actually give your answer to this.
Yeah, no problem. I've been talking a lot, so it's really good to hear this dialogue from different folks. So, I I just have a couple of reactions to what Terry was saying. I'm also from Maryland, and now being a Portlander for 12 years now, my background in environmental justice and being from a community that has been historically disenfranchised, and from my experience from working with underserved communities, more representation matters, period. I think building up this accountability allows for our systems to work better. And, you know, this is, again, the hallmark of our democratic system that we treasure. I kind of mentioned that a little bit before. The proposal is really trying to build a process and systems and conditions that will really foster collaboration. If you have just one person representing a district, there's like only so much that one person can hear. And it's like, okay, which side am I going to choose from all the constituents that I represent in this district? Whereas if you have three, you know, that sort of broadens the playing field of like, okay, like one person might take up homelessness for the district, one person might take up climate change, another person could take up small business issues, all within the district, and they're working together to make sure these systems are being fostered. I will say that, you know, changing a system doesn't mean you necessarily can change people's behaviors. So I can't really speak to like, oh my gosh, like how good are they going to get along? Because right now we kind of have a system where sometimes people just don't get along and they don't collaborate, they don't work together. But we can change the conditions that our city government has so it fosters collaboration, where in order to get you know, your initiative through, you have to work with others, you have to get input, you have to seek that out and sort of build better proposals as a team. In various other cities, you know, we're the size of Memphis and we have a system that doesn't really foster those different perspectives. Best practices show for the majority of how you build up a government is you have one representative for 50,000 people. And that was a best practice number that came up, I think, with the even like the conception of the charter, like almost 100 years ago. And so I think it's really important to hone in that people want more and not less. And I think it's really a sad situation where Portland is the biggest city in Oregon and places like Bend have one representative for 12,000 people. I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I agree. Ethan?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Amira in that I think it's unlikely that human nature changes because the charter changes. You know, people are people, and in a lot of cases, yeah, these systems get kind of messy because people are messy. You know, it's kind of the way it works. But in this case, you know, what we've got are people who are being elected by 150,000 plus constituents. They're representing a lot of people. The population of Bend is about 200,000. So in essence, what we're doing with these districts is we are giving each elected official about almost 80% of the population of Bend to represent on their own. And I think that the point that Terry makes is a good one, which is you got to be careful not to conflate, you know, kind of various numbers with each other. And the important numbers to kind of keep in mind here are that we've created basically 4 very large districts that aren't going to actually get to the fundamental problem of how do you decrease the number of people that each elected official is essentially trying to connect with on a regular basis. That's part of this proposal, which is why this proposal is, for me, so hard to support, because the governing side of this, I think, doesn't really come up to the expectations that a lot of us would have for how can we improve governance in the city of Portland. One aspect of that I think hasn't been addressed at all is what is the role for neighborhood associations in this? And, you know, what could Portland's legacy of neighborhood associations mean in its form of governance going forward? And I just haven't seen that, and I'm kind of disappointed as a consequence.
Debbie?
Well, I agree with what Amira and Ethan both said about, changing the structure doesn't change the people, but I do think that having there are some elements that do have an impact, and that's been documented. So ranked choice voting is one of those in terms of reducing the animosity and during campaigns. Once people are elected, there are plans to have a district office in each of the 4 districts that the city council members would share. They still may not get along all the time or agree on everything, and they might be representing sort of different points of view between their district, but that still is, as part of a larger council of 12, they will have to, in order to be successful and continue to remain in office, they need to be able to, find those ways to collaborate and get things passed. So I think we are setting up a structure that can work and has been shown to work in other areas, and it will, I think, lead to new behaviors that it won't happen overnight. It won't change people, but I think structure does have an impact over time as people adapt to what works and what doesn't work.
Okay, we need to switch through. Terry, very brief, and then Amira.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the thing on the neighborhood association and give you an example out of Baltimore, because the size of the Portland districts are so large. And that was a problem in Baltimore. So when they switched from multi-member districts to single-member districts, the size of those districts shrunk. And what happened was that neighborhood associations that were previously too small to matter in a district became big enough and important enough that they did matter. So in areas in South Baltimore and East Baltimore, which were highly industrialized, the communities there that were overlooked for years and years and years because of powerful chemical industry and industrial polluters now had power in City Hall that they never had before. So those smokestack districts turned overnight, and their approach to polluting industry changed because the neighborhood associations were empowered. And they were able to isolate the neighborhoods that were more powerful in different districts. So that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to isolate powerful neighborhoods in the districts that you have that are likely to be proposed here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amira?
Yeah, to get to the neighborhood association discussion, I guess it just made me think about so just for clarity, when the districts are going to be drawn up, that is like a separate body that will look at the number of people in a certain area, making sure that communities that are connected through like transit lines remain the same and aren't broken up, and that similar cultures also kind of stay together. And I would say that is not a system or anything new from how our region has operated. If you look at places like Multnomah County and how it's broken up in its districts, or how Metro is broken up, I would say it's like kind of the same. And then our proposal is adding the added benefit of having more voices in one district. And once you get smaller and smaller districts, and Terry kind of alluded to this, that you're kind of get this tunnel vision focus of things that only matter to that one area versus a region or a community of people. So just recommend folks kind of look at this not as like a neighborhood by neighborhood situation where you have to like fight over resources or concerns, but like what's impacting your community and the communities that are going through the same things in that area.
Okay, thank you. We go on to the next question, and we're gonna ask only about the cost of the proposed government structure, and then we're gonna go to our concluding question just because we are running out of time. Okay, Stephanie.
Okay, fine. Let's look at the cost of the proposed government structure. The city's budget office estimates that the cost of implementing the measure would range from 900,000 to 8.7 million annually. The range of the cost estimate would depend on policy decision-making outside the charter scope. But here are some of the cost considerations. A lot more for an entire new office for the city manager, fully staffed and equipped. A lot more for 8 additional commissioners, presumably at current salary rates, which are 125,000 per year. So that's an additional $1 million. That doesn't include benefits and or staff or office rental and other considerations for an office. Somewhat less would be possibly reduced staffing for each commissioner versus what we have now, or what they have now. More possibly office space within each district and at City Hall. Maybe the same salary for the mayor, same office staff and equipment, somewhat less for some streamlining and consolidation within bureaus. So it appears that the new approach would cost us a good deal more than what we budget for at this time. And the question is, do you feel that the proposed reform would result in long-term economies via improved efficiencies? Debbie, would you like to start off?
You're muted.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I was getting ready to raise my hand. So thank you for calling on me for that.
Just before you start, there is a question of how the full city budget actually is, and if 8.7 million is a lot, or is it a small percentage of the overall budget?
Right.
Sonia just posted 6 billion as a full budget of the city. So
Yeah.
make your assumption if 8.7 is a lot or a little for that.
Right. The total amount for the ongoing costs is 0.14%. So it's less than 1%. It's almost less. I mean, it is less than 0.2%. And that's at the upper end of the range. So I think that but I do want to answer the questions about what's included and what's not. These cost estimates, it's really quite a wide range. You know, when the Office of Finance and Management put together the cost estimates, they actually, on the ongoing costs, they have 0.9 million per year to 8.7 million per year. And so often people are just quoting the top number as if that's the cost, but it does include, it includes an estimate of salaries, although we don't know what those are because we've established a salary commission of HR professionals who will determine salaries for city council. Right now, city council just votes on their own salary. And this was set up an independent commission rather than having them do that. It does include the cost for district offices and for modifying City Hall for the offices that will go in there and the city council room and everything like that. So it includes those are in the transition costs, but the ongoing costs of maintaining 4 district offices are included. They made assumptions about the staffing size. It probably is going to be smaller because since the commissioners are not managing bureaus, right now they have a number of staff people who are assigned to be the liaison to each of the bureaus that they manage. So, you know, that adds to the staffing that we have now. It does include costs for the city administrator and staff that they might have. So those are all estimates. And what they did was they looked at cities that would have a similar structure to and similar size as Portland and similar structure. And that's how they developed this range of costs. So it was done by the Office of Finance and Management, not by the Charter Commission, but and that's why there is this range. And some of the things won't be known, as I said, because there's a salary commission, you know, but the city is already working on planning for the transition. And if this passes, they will be ready to step into the steps to do the districting. You know, they are planning to hire some consulting help for changing this. So even though the costs, I mean, they do seem like large numbers, right? Because most of us aren't dealing with those kinds of numbers. But if you put it in the context of the budget, $6.8 billion budget for the city as a whole, they are not that big. And what they don't include are any efficiencies that might be gained from better operation of the city itself in the operational side by having more coordination, less duplication between bureaus. We have 27 bureaus now. You know, there will be opportunities over time for a more unified and management to raise questions about how the city should be organized. None of that will happen right away. You know, that is something that are the benefits over time that we should see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Terry, you wanted to follow up on this? You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I was just going to type something in the chat that I thought I heard, and Debbie and Amira were at the commission meeting this week where they got a briefing on this, and I didn't hear then, and I'm not sure whether you said this or not, but how many district offices was the assumption? Is it 4 district offices or 12 district offices?
4 district offices.
Okay, so how are those going to
have shared space in the district? You know, and again, this doesn't mean that they agree on positions or would how much they would collaborate, but there would be a cost savings for having shared space.
Okay, yeah, because that was, you know, how those district offices got run and who's in charge of who, which staff, and that is going to be really fraught.
Ethan?
Yeah, thank you. Just really briefly, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's actually not in the 185 pages that we'll be voting on. And one of the things that's not in that 185 pages is how many offices, how many staff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are all things yet to be worked out. And I gotta say that as citizens, we should expect that governance is gonna cost us something because you know, we want the system to work, we want it to work well. So there is gonna be a cost associated with this. What those costs are and what those funds will be spent on has yet to be determined. So it's a lot of blank area that's going to have to get filled in beyond what it is that we're going to vote on in November.
Okay. More comments on that?
Yeah, just briefly. Debbie was talking about the efficiencies that are going to occur. Those efficiencies are going to occur regardless of whether Mingus Maps' plan passes or whether this plan passes, because they both have a city manager, and most of the efficiencies you're going to have are going to be administrative efficiencies. The cost of 12 people, there's no way that is going to be less than the cost of 5. It just isn't, and it doesn't include the cost of public financing campaigns, which, you know, people see that they might get elected. There might be 15 people running for these 3 spots. That's a whole lot more than there are right now, and I think there's going to be a lot of money there, more money than they expect. And it's a question of, you know, what percentage of the budget is. If you're an agency that needs more social workers to talk to people on the street, or if you're a firefighter that needs some new equipment, you're not concerned about what percentage of the budget it is. You're concerned about how many dollars is it. And $43 million over a 3-year period is a lot of money. Regardless of what percentage it is of the budget, it takes away a lot of services that are needed.
Debbie?
Well, I do want to say that, you know, I've heard this question raised of the public financing, and that is included in the cost estimates that the city did. And in fact, their estimate is that because this eliminates the primary, there are some savings of costs. And so within their range, it goes from the election costs, let's see if I have those numbers, go from a minus 700,000, in other words, 700,000 savings to 300,000 positive. So that's what their range is. And part of it is that, you know, you have more counselors, but you don't have the primary. And then you also, because they're smaller districts, the formula for the public financing is less than for a citywide election. So they did take that into account in their estimates. Now, you might disagree with their estimates, but it has been, they've at least tried to estimate that.
And sorry, the only thing I would add on the percentage question, you know, so I think it really is important to look at percentages, because that is the amount of funding that is being taken away from something else. And so say you start from scratch, like you just cancel out all the costs we have right now with our current system, the most we would have to pay is like 1.3 of the entire city budget. The discretionary funds of the city budget is 10%. So we're talking about like a piece of a piece that will help foster better governance structure. And I, for one, do not want to be cheap when it comes to how my government is working.
Yeah, you do want to have a smooth running machine. I mean, this is one of the biggest concerns and criticisms we have right now, that there are so many obstacles. So there needs to be some improvement, I guess, anyhow. I want to thank you, all of you, for giving your input here. And to close off our panel discussion, I have a concluding question for each of our panelists, and I ask for a very brief and quick answer. And that is, what is the problem that most needs solving from your point of view in that whole thing right now? And let's start off with Debbie.
Well, you know, when I volunteered and applied to be on the commission, the thing I was most concerned about was the form of government and the feeling that we needed to have a city administrator and move away from the commission form of government. But what I learned in the process is just how disconnected and disenfranchised just unhappy Portlanders are with their local government. They don't feel connected. And so some of the changes that we're talking about in increasing representation and changing our form of voting are to address those issues. And I feel that they are interconnected, that we're making some changes that to balance that with better representation is what makes it more successful. So for me, it is the combination of the measures, and the overall result is a more engaged and representative, feeling among Portlanders, where they can be committed to their local government and feel like it's doing good work, as well as having the operational efficiency and streamlining that I think is possible with bringing in a professional city administrator.
Mm-hmm. Stephen.
Yes, I think the single most important function of government at this point is accountability. And I think people need to take a look at what Mingus Maps' plan is. It essentially has the same framework that the Charter Commission has without the flaws. It will increase accountability, not make questions about who's in charge of where. The problem of who's in charge of the city manager is clearly stated in Mingus's plan. The relationship between the commission and the mayor will be more clearly stated. The relationship between constituents and their elected council people is clearer when you have a single member district. Accountability is what the citizens are looking for. That's what we heard from Debbie just now. They don't feel it's there now. Mingus Maps' proposal is going to have that accountability without all the flaws that are in the Charter Commission report.
Okay, Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people in Portland are very concerned about the outcomes that they're not seeing. They're really not concerned about voting per se or representation up against concerns having to do with crime, public safety, and homelessness. And these proposals really don't address those things. Addressing those things is a whole other conversation that kind of goes way beyond kind of where we are now. And as a consequence, I think there's going to be a tendency for people to say, well, I'm angry about how the city is dealing with the issues in front of it, so I'm going to send them a message by voting for this proposal. And I think what people need to realize is you're not sending a message, you're actually adopting a proposal when you vote for this proposal. And it reminds me a lot of Measure 5, which some of you may remember, which is the property tax limitation that we have here in the state of Oregon, where a lot of people were grumpy about what government was or was not doing and felt that by voting for Measure 5, they were sending a message to government. But what they were also doing was undercutting the financing for particularly local schools, something which they somehow didn't think was going to happen if all they were doing was sending a message. So it's not about sending a message, nor is it about addressing, I think, the fundamental concerns that people have now about how government is or is not working in Portland.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Terry and then Amira.
And again, thanks for doing this. This is always very interesting. The reason I got involved is, I think it's really clear and everyone agrees, and you'll get no disagreement from me, that the form of government needs to be fixed. And that's, yes, let's do that. But that necessary reform doesn't necessarily have to go with an unnecessary reform like ranked choice voting or fiddling with the primary. Those are choices that we could make and probably should have been on the ballot to look at. And then above all, and I moved here 2 years ago. I'm from Baltimore. I lived Baltimore's experience with multi-member districts. For goodness sakes, don't make things worse. Telling you, after a couple election cycles, you're going to realize that multi-member districts have made things worse. You're going to have just deadwood and unaccountable, difficult council members to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, so that's where I'm coming from, and that's what I hope people take away from my being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. So Amira, the final word.
Yeah, well, I was trying to find my application for when I first applied to be on the Charter Commission, because I really appreciate what Debbie said. I was like, oh yeah, I need to dig that up and kind of remember why I'm a part of that this work. And I think it's because we've had a dysfunctional bureaucracy for a good amount of time now. And as a former insider, I think the one thing that we can't do without is accountability and representation. This whole package is meant to go together as a proposal. You can't have the handlebars without the wheels. You can't have the wheels without the seat. It all functions together as a bike. And I just feel that it's too easy to stick with the status quo right now and just kick this can down the road. Now is the time to really invest in changing Portland for the better so that it can actually work for all of us. And I do mean absolutely all of us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All your panelists, I can only say from my experience living through the changes from East Germany becoming a West German and then moving into the United States, changes in representation and changes in my own position, understanding myself, it's so challenging every single time. And there is no way of having that a smooth process no matter what. So you are forcing that onto yourself, and it's very needed. And I think we should be all very gentle with one another and say, like, I mean, we all agree, it seems like we need that change. And just let's be in that vision of saying, how do we make it into a workable thing? And, you know, no matter how that election will turn out, I think we still all strive for, you know, a better form of government. So with that, I really want to say thank you for all your, you know, good insights and good arguments. And I mean, I would just like to talk for another 5 hours now to get to those points. But with that, I really want you to have a wonderful evening.
So
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think we don't really have time to go to further audience question. We addressed a few things that were in the comments, and we're gonna keep the comments, we're gonna post the video, and I think we will have more discussions to come in the future. So thank you very, very much for reading and participating.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye
And thank
bye.
you to the attendees.
Yeah.